My name is Lillian, and I am 28 years old. The scars on my back tell a story of the night my brother Kevin lashed me with a belt until I collapsed on our basement floor. When I woke up bleeding, my mother whispered, "Be grateful we feed you." Today, I work with abuse survivors, showing them that healing is possible and justice hits harder than any belt ever could. If you are watching this from a place where family should mean safety, please hit like and subscribe as I share how I found justice stronger than any belt. Growing up in suburban Denver, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. After my biological father died when I was 4, my mother Karen remarried Frank when I was 6 years old. Frank brought his son Kevin into our lives. Kevin was 8 at the time, just 2 years older than me. We moved into a beautiful 2-story house with a white picket fence and a backyard that seemed enormous to my young eyes. Frank worked as a bank manager, wearing crisp suits and carrying a leather briefcase that smelled like important business. Mom stayed home, transforming from a working single mother to a dedicated housewife almost overnight. The first few years were relatively normal. I remember Christmases with piles of presents under a perfectly decorated tree, birthday parties with matching plates and napkins, and weekend trips to the local amusement park where Frank would win stuffed animals for both Kevin and me. Mom seemed happy, always smiling and telling her friends how lucky she was to have found Frank after the tragedy of losing my dad. But beneath the surface, small signs of trouble bubbled up that I was too young to recognize. Frank had strict rules about everything. The house had to be spotless when he came home. Dinner had to be ready at exactly 6:30 p.m. Kevin and I had to maintain straight, as in school. My mother needed to account for every dollar she spent, presenting receipts for Frank to review each weekend. "Your stepfather provides for us," Mom would say whenever I complained about the rigid structure. "We need to show our appreciation by keeping things exactly how he likes them." As the years passed, I watched Kevin transform from a relatively friendly stepbrother into something else entirely. By the time he hit 14, Kevin had adopted many of his father's mannerisms. He walked with the same stiff posture, spoke with the same clipped tone, and developed the same expectation that others should bend to his will. Frank seemed proud of this transformation, often patting Kevin on the shoulder and saying things like, "That is my boy, strong, like his father." When I was 11 and Kevin 13, I started feeling uncomfortable being alone with him. He would stare at me with barely contained anger if I used the television remote or sat in what he considered his spot on the couch. He never hit me during those early years, but the threat seemed to hover in the air between us. "Stop being so sensitive," Mom would say if I mentioned feeling unsafe. Brothers and sisters always have their little squabbles. But it was more than squabbles, and deep down I think she knew it. I could see it in the way she would tense up when Frank criticized Kevin for being too soft with me. I could hear it in her forced cheerfulness when she intervened in our arguments before Frank could notice. My mother changed too. The woman who had once fiercely protected me as a single mom became increasingly anxious and eager to please Frank. She stopped wearing the bright colors she had always loved, switching to muted tones that Frank preferred. She cut her hair short because Frank mentioned liking it that way. She stopped calling her college friends because Frank thought they were too liberal and a bad influence. I remember one night when I was 13 coming downstairs for a glass of water and overhearing Frank and my mother arguing in the kitchen. I could not make out the words, just the harsh whisper of his voice and the soft, pleading tone of hers. The next morning, she wore a long-sleeved shirt despite the summer heat. When she reached for the cereal box, her sleeve rode up, revealing a darkening bruise on her forearm. Our eyes met for a second, and I saw something I had never seen in my mother before, shame mixed with fear. "I bumped into the door last night," she said, quickly tugging her sleeve down. "So clumsy of me." That was the first time I realized that what was happening in our house was not normal, not healthy, and definitely not safe. But like many children in abusive households, I had no vocabulary to name it and no idea how to escape it. All I knew was that something was very wrong with the perfect family portrait we presented to the world. By the time Kevin turned 17, his behavior toward me had deteriorated from cold distance to active aggression. I was 13, awkward and trying to navigate middle school while walking on eggshells at home. Kevin had become Frank's golden child, excelling in academics and varsity baseball, his achievements constantly paraded before family friends as evidence of Frank's superior parenting. The first serious incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I had spread my homework across the dining room table, working on a science project due the next day. Kevin came home from baseball practice in a foul mood, his team having lost an important game. He took one look at my project, a solar system model made with styrofoam balls, and deliberately knocked it to the floor. "This table is for eating, not your stupid school junk," he snapped, watching as Neptune and Saturn rolled under the china cabinet. "Mom said I could work here," I protested, dropping to my knees to retrieve the scattered planets. Kevin leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you tell Mom or Dad about this, I will make you regret it. Nobody will believe you anyway. I am the good kid, remember? When I tried to talk to Mom about what happened, she dismissed my concerns. Siblings fight sometimes, Lillian. Kevin is under a lot of pressure with college applications coming up. Just try to stay out of his way when he is stressed." That became my strategy: avoid Kevin, avoid conflict, become invisible. But it was impossible to disappear completely in our own home. Kevin seemed to find reasons to be angry with me. If I used the bathroom too long in the morning, if I breathed too loudly during family movie night, if I got slightly better grades than him in English, his one weak subject. Frank began to delegate discipline to Kevin when he was away on business trips. "Kevin is the man of the house when I am gone," he would announce before leaving. "I expect you ladies to listen to him." My mother would nod obediently, and I would feel a knot form in my stomach knowing what was coming. The first time Kevin physically hurt me was over something trivial. I had stayed at school for a study group and arrived home 5 minutes after my curfew. Kevin was waiting by the door, checking his watch with exaggerated motions. "You are late," he stated flatly. "Just by 5 minutes." "The bus was delayed," I explained, trying to move past him toward the stairs. He blocked my way and without warning slapped me hard across the face. The shock of it stunned me more than the pain. "Next time be punctual," he said calmly, as if he had just commented on the weather instead of assaulting his younger sister. I ran to my room, tears streaming down my face, my cheek burning. When my mother came home from her part-time job at the library, I showed her the red mark still visible on my face. "Oh, honey," she sighed, "you know how important punctuality is in this house. Just try harder to be on time, and these things will not happen." Her response hurt more than Kevin's slap. In that moment, I realized I was truly alone in my own home. I tried reaching out to a teacher once, Mrs. Garcia, who had noticed my withdrawal in class. "Things at home are not great." I ventured, not quite brave enough to say more. "Is everything okay with your parents, Lillian?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "It is not my parents," I started, but then stopped. How could I explain that my brother had appointed himself my personal tormentor with my parents' blessing? It sounded unbelievable even to me. "You can tell me anything," Mrs. Garcia assured me. But when I mentioned Kevin's name, her expression changed. "Kevin Williams, he is one of our top students. Just yesterday, he was helping with the freshman tutoring program." The doubt in her voice was clear. Kevin had cultivated a sterling reputation at school, charming teachers and peers alike. No one would believe he was capable of cruelty behind closed doors. I developed strategies to survive. I memorized everyone's schedules to minimize time alone with Kevin. I completed chores before being asked. I studied hard to maintain perfect grades, removing any excuse for discipline. I became an expert at reading facial expressions and body language, sensing when Frank was in a dangerous mood or when Kevin was looking for an outlet for his frustration. The loneliness was crushing. I had few friends because I was never allowed to visit their homes, and I was too ashamed to invite anyone to mine. What would they think if they witnessed how I was treated? Would they tell someone who could help? Or would they simply stop being my friend, not wanting to get involved in something so uncomfortable? On Kevin's 17th birthday, Frank presented him with an expensive leather belt, handcrafted Italian leather with a heavy silver buckle. "This is a man's belt," Frank declared proudly as Kevin unwrapped it. "Something of quality that will last for years." Kevin ran his fingers over the smooth leather, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Frank clapped him on the shoulder and added, "Sometimes beautiful things can also teach important lessons." The way they exchanged looks sent a chill through me. It was as though they shared a secret understanding, one that excluded my mother and me, but somehow involved us too. That belt would come to symbolize everything wrong with our family dynamics, though I did not know it yet. I just knew that when Kevin threaded it through his belt loops the next morning wearing it to school for the first time, I felt a premonition of danger that made my hands shake as I packed my lunch. It was a Friday evening in October, unusually cold for Denver that time of year. Frank and my mother were attending a charity gala for the bank where he worked, leaving Kevin in charge of the house. At 17, he took this responsibility with disturbing seriousness, strutting around the kitchen in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, checking his watch every few minutes, as if managing a corporate office instead of watching his 13-year-old sister. "Mom left lasagna in the fridge," he informed me. "I expect the kitchen to be spotless after you eat." I nodded silently, keeping my eyes down as I had learned to do. Direct eye contact often triggered his anger, interpreted as defiance rather than normal human interaction. I waited until he went upstairs before retrieving the food hungry after a long day at school, where I had skipped lunch to finish a math assignment. The lasagna was cold in the center despite my efforts to heat it properly. As I carried the plate to the table, my sock caught on a rough spot in the linoleum. I stumbled, barely catching myself, but the plate tilted enough to send the glass of milk next to it crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass seemed to echo through the entire house. My heart raced as I dropped to my knees, frantically gathering shards of glass with trembling hands. A drop of blood appeared where a jagged edge had nicked my finger, but I barely noticed. All I could think was, clean it up before Kevin comes, clean it up before Kevin comes. Too late. His footsteps thundered down the stairs, and then he was standing in the doorway, taking in the scene with cold, calculating eyes. "What did you do?" His voice was eerily calm. "It was an accident," I whispered, still kneeling amidst the mess. "I will clean it up right away." Kevin pulled his phone from his pocket and my stomach dropped. "Dad needs to know about this." "Please," I begged, "it is just a glass. I will buy a new one with my allowance." He ignored me, already dialing. I could hear Frank's voice answering the familiar, irritated tone when he was interrupted at an event. Kevin described the situation as if reporting a major disaster rather than a broken glass, emphasizing my carelessness and disrespect for family property. I could not hear Frank's exact words, but Kevin's expression shifted from righteous anger to something darker, more satisfied. "Yes, sir. I understand. I will handle it." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, his eyes never leaving my face. "Dad says you need to be taught a lesson about responsibility and respect." Ice seemed to flood my veins. I knew what that meant in our household. I said I was sorry. "It will not happen again." "Get up," Kevin ordered, ignoring my apology. "Go to the basement." The basement, where punishments happened because it was soundproofed by thick concrete walls, where Frank had installed a small gym that no one used except as a place to administer discipline away from windows and neighbors. "Kevin, please," I tried one last time. "It was just an accident." His hand shot out, gripping my upper arm so tightly I knew it would bruise. "Now, Lillian." He marched me down the basement stairs, flipping on the harsh fluorescent lights that made the space feel like an interrogation room. The weight bench sat in the center, a grim throne for what was about to happen. "Bend over the bench," he instructed, his voice detached, as if he were merely a technician performing a routine procedure. When I hesitated, frozen with fear, he shoved me roughly toward the bench. "Dad said I should use whatever means necessary to ensure you learn this lesson." I heard the soft slide of leather as he removed his belt, the one Frank had given him for his birthday. The sound sent panic coursing through me. Kevin had hit me before with open hands and once with a wooden spoon, but never with a belt. "Never with that belt." "This is for your own good," he said, echoing Frank's favorite phrase. "Count them out loud." The first strike landed across my back with a force that stole my breath. The leather bit through my thin t-shirt, searing my skin like a brand. 1, I gasped, tears already streaming down my face. The second blow came faster, harder, landing slightly lower than the first. 2, I choked out. By the 5th strike, I was sobbing, my knees threatening to buckle. By the 8th, I could feel something warm and wet soaking through my shirt. Blood. He was drawing blood. "Kevin, stop," I pleaded. "You are hurting me too much." "Weak," he spat. "Just like Mom. No wonder Dad says you will never amount to anything." The next blow landed with even greater force, as if my pain fueled his strength rather than tempering it. I lost count somewhere around 12, my vision blurring, consciousness flickering like a dying light bulb. The last thing I remember before collapsing was Kevin's voice, distant and cold. "Get up." "We are not finished." But I could not get up. My body had reached its limit, shutting down to protect me from pain I could no longer bear. I slumped forward over the bench, darkness enveloping me like a mercy. When I regained consciousness, I was still in the basement, but now my mother was there, her face pale with shock as she helped me to a sitting position. "What were you thinking, provoking him like that?" she whispered, though I had done nothing to provoke such violence. "Mom," I croaked, my throat raw from crying. "He hurt me, really hurt me." She glanced nervously toward the stairs, checking if Frank or Kevin might overhear. "You know how important this dinner was for your father. Now, he had to leave early because of your behavior." I stared at her in disbelief, my back screaming with pain, feeling the wetness of blood soaking my shirt. My behavior, I dropped a glass by accident. Her face hardened in that way. I had come to recognize the expression she wore when choosing Frank over me. "Why can you not just behave properly? Be grateful we feed you. Give you a roof over your head. Some children have nothing." Those words cut deeper than the belt had. Be grateful we feed you. As if providing basic necessities for your child was an extraordinary act of charity, rather than the bare minimum of parental responsibility. She helped me upstairs but did not offer to treat my wounds or call a doctor. Instead, she retreated to her bedroom where Frank was changing out of his gala attire, leaving me to stumble to the bathroom alone. I locked the door and slowly, painfully peeled off my ruined shirt. The mirror revealed what Kevin had done. Angry red welts crisscrossed my back, several broken open and bleeding. The pattern of the belt's edge was clearly visible in some places, the skin already darkening into bruises around the cuts. As I stood there staring at the physical evidence of my family's cruelty, something hardened inside me. This was not discipline. This was not love. This was abuse, pure and simple. And somehow I had to find a way out before next time killed me. The next morning I dressed carefully for school, layering a loose sweatshirt over a soft cotton t-shirt to avoid irritating the wounds on my back. Every movement was agony, but I was determined to go to school. Home had become a prison. School was my only respite. Frank and Kevin had already left for a father-son fishing trip, their absence a temporary reprieve. My mother barely looked at me during breakfast. Guilt and shame evident in her averted eyes. She did not ask how I was feeling or offer any medical attention. "I packed your lunch," was all she said as I headed out the door. At school, I moved through the morning in a fog of pain and exhaustion. Sitting in hard plastic chairs was torture, the pressure against my back, causing fresh waves of agony with each shift in position. By fourth period, I was fighting back tears, my concentration shattered. Then came gym class. The one class I could not fake my way through. The one class that required changing clothes in front of others. Lillian, Miss Thompson, our gym teacher, called when I tried to slip past her without changing. "You know the rules. Proper gym attire, or it affects your grade." I am not feeling well. I attempted hugging my books to my chest like a shield. "Could I sit out today?" She studied my face, noting the dark circles under my eyes, the paleness of my skin. "Come to my office for a minute." In her small office adjacent to the locker room, Miss Thompson gestured for me to sit. "This is the third time this month you have asked to skip class. Is everything okay?" Something about her genuine concern cracked the dam I had built around my emotions. Tears welled up before I could stop them. "I cannot change," I whispered. "My back." Her expression shifted from concern to alarm. "Are you injured? Did something happen?" I hesitated, years of family secrecy warring with my desperate need for help. "If I show you, will you promise not to tell anyone?" A childish request impossible for any responsible adult to honor. Miss Thompson knelt beside my chair, her voice gentle but firm. "Lillian, if you are hurt, I need to help you. That might mean involving others who can make sure you are safe." In that moment, I made the decision that would change everything. I turned and slowly lifted the back of my sweatshirt, then my t-shirt, revealing what Kevin had done. I heard Miss Thompson's sharp intake of breath. "Oh my God, Lillian. Who did this to you?" "My brother," I admitted, the words feeling strange after so many years of silence. "Last night, because I broke a glass." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Miss Thompson immediately took me to the school nurse who documented my injuries with clinical efficiency, her face grim as she photographed the welts and cuts. The principal was called then Child Protective Services. A social worker arrived, gentle, voiced, but direct with her questions. "Has this happened before? Who else was home when this occurred? Do your parents know about this injury? Do you feel safe returning home today?" To that last question, I finally spoke the truth. I had been hiding from myself, number. I do not feel safe there at all. I was taken to the hospital for a proper medical examination. The doctor, a kind woman with silver-streaked hair, cleaned and dressed my wounds while explaining that some might leave permanent scars. "These are not consistent with reasonable discipline," she stated for the record. "This is abuse." The word hung in the sterile air of the examination room. Abuse. A label for what I had endured for years. A validation that what happened in our house was not normal, not acceptable, not my fault. While I was at the hospital, my parents and Kevin were contacted by authorities. Their reaction was predictable: denial, minimization, blame shifting. "Lillian has always been prone to exaggeration," Frank told the social worker, according to reports I later saw. "She is going through a difficult phase, acting out for attention." My mother echoed his claims, though witnesses noted she seemed nervous, eyes constantly darting to Frank for approval. "We have always been a loving family. I cannot imagine how this happened." Kevin, coached by Frank, presented himself as the responsible older brother reluctantly tasked with reasonable discipline. "She was being disrespectful and destructive," he stated. "I only gave her a light punishment like Dad asked me to. She must have hurt herself worse afterward to make it look bad." But the medical evidence told a different story. The pattern of injuries was consistent with repeated blows from a belt, delivered with significant force. The doctor estimated it would have taken at least 15 to 20 strikes to cause such damage. That night, instead of returning to the house with the white picket fence, I was placed with a temporary foster family. The Johnsons were experienced foster parents who specialized in emergency placements. Their home was modest but warm, with clear rules posted on the refrigerator and soft blankets on every couch. "You are safe here," Mrs. Johnson assured me as she showed me to a small bedroom with pale blue walls. "No one is going to hurt you in this house." It was the first time in years I fell asleep without fear gnawing my stomach. The legal process moved slowly. I was assigned a guardian ad litem named Sarah, a lawyer whose sole job was to represent my best interests in court. She explained each step as we went, patient with my questions and fears. "Will I have to see them in court?" I asked during one of our meetings. "Unfortunately, yes," Sarah admitted. "But I will be right beside you and you will be completely safe." Frank hired an expensive lawyer who specialized in family cases. They fought hard against the emergency custody order, presenting character witnesses who testified to what a pillar of the community Frank was, how Kevin was an honor student headed for an Ivy League school, how my mother volunteered at church. The pressure to recant my story was enormous. Phone calls came from relatives I barely knew. pleading with me to stop tearing the family apart. Letters arrived from church members suggesting I had misinterpreted what happened. Frank's lawyer built a narrative of me as a troubled teen making false accusations for attention. There were moments I almost gave up. The weight of standing against my entire family, of being painted as a liar and troublemaker, felt too heavy to bear. But then I would catch a glimpse of my back in the mirror, the healing wounds that would become permanent scars, and my resolve would strengthen. Miss Thompson visited me at the Johnsons bringing homework and updates from school. "I am proud of you," she told me. "What you are doing takes incredible courage." Sarah prepared me meticulously for court, explaining what to expect, how to answer questions truthfully but concisely, how to remain calm if Kevin or Frank tried to intimidate me with looks or gestures. "Just tell the truth," she advised. "That is all you need to do. The truth is on your side." As the court date approached, my nightmares intensified. I would wake gasping, feeling phantom belt strikes across my back. Mrs. Johnson would bring me warm milk and sit with me until I could sleep again, never rushing me, never asking questions. I was not ready to answer. The day before we were due in court, Sarah called with unexpected news. "The prosecutor wants to amend the charges to include your stepfather," she explained. "Based on your brother's history and the severity of your injuries, they believe Frank directed this abuse and should be held equally responsible." It was the first time I allowed myself to hope that true justice might be possible, that the court might see through the perfect family facade to the darkness that had nearly destroyed me. The juvenile courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, nothing like the grand chambers shown on television dramas. The wood paneling gave it a solemn atmosphere, the state seal hanging prominently behind the judge's bench. Every sound seemed amplified in the hushed space, the scratch of pens on legal pads, the rustle of documents being passed between attorneys, the soft squeak of chairs as people shifted position. I sat beside Sarah, trying to keep my breathing steady as she had taught me. "Do not look at them until you have to," she had advised. "Focus on the judge, or on me." But I could not help one quick glance to my right, where Frank, my mother, and Kevin sat with their attorney. Frank looked immaculate. As always, his suit pressed his expression controlled. My mother appeared smaller, somehow hunched slightly as if trying to disappear. And Kevin, wearing a blue blazer that made him look older than his 17 years, stared straight ahead, jaw clenched tight. The proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecutor, a woman with silver-framed glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor, outlined the case against Kevin, and now Frank as well. "What happened to Lillian Williams was not discipline," she stated firmly. "It was a brutal assault that left a 13-year-old child unconscious and bleeding. The evidence will show that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of abuse enabled and encouraged by the adults who should have protected her." Frank's attorney countered with the narrative they had been building. "I was a troubled teen making exaggerated claims. Kevin was an exemplary young man who had administered appropriate discipline as directed by his father. Any injuries were accidental or self-inflicted after the fact. The Williams are a respected family," he concluded smoothly. "Dismantling this home based on the allegations of an admittedly difficult child would be a grave injustice." When it was my turn to testify, Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly before I took the stand. The oath to tell the truth felt momentous, a promise to myself as much as to the court. I began with the night of the beating, describing in detail what had happened. The prosecutor gently guided me through my testimony, asking clarifying questions when needed, giving me time when my voice faltered. "And what did your mother say when she found you injured?" she asked. "She told me to be grateful they feed me," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "She said some children have nothing." There was a soft murmur in the courtroom at this, quickly silenced by the judge. When Frank's attorney cross-examined me, his approach was calculated to undermine my credibility. He brought up minor disciplinary issues from school times I had argued with teachers or received detention for talking in class. He questioned why I had not reported earlier incidents, implying I was lying about the pattern of abuse. Is it not true, he suggested, that you are angry about being disciplined for breaking household rules and you have exaggerated what happened to get attention? No, I answered, looking directly at him. I dropped a glass by accident. My brother beat me with a belt until I was unconscious. Those are the facts. Other witnesses followed. Miss Thompson testified about discovering my injuries, her voice breaking slightly as she described my reluctance to change for gym class, my fear of anyone finding out. The school nurse and hospital doctor presented the medical evidence, their clinical descriptions, somehow more damning than emotional testimony could have been. The doctor clicked through photographs of my injuries displayed on a screen visible to the judge and attorneys. These wounds, the doctor stated, are consistent with repeated blows from a narrow, rigid object like a belt. The force required to create these injuries goes far beyond what could be considered reasonable corporal punishment. Several lacerations required medical adhesive to close, and some will leave permanent scarring. As the images appeared on screen, the courtroom fell completely silent. Even Frank's attorney stopped writing notes, his pen hovering motionless above his legal pad. I did not need to see the photos. I had lived the reality they documented. Instead, I watched the faces of those viewing them for the first time. Shock, disbelief, horror. The social worker who had interviewed Kevin testified next, reporting that while initially defensive, he had made concerning statements during their conversation. When asked about the severity of the beating, Kevin Williams stated, and I quote, "She needs to learn respect the same way I did." When I asked him to clarify what that meant, he declined to elaborate further. Frank's attorney objected repeatedly during this testimony, but the judge allowed it to continue, ruling that Kevin's statements were relevant to establishing the household dynamics. Then came the moment I had been dreading: Kevin's testimony. He took the stand with the confidence of someone who had always been believed, always been favored. But that confidence began to crack under the prosecutor's methodical questioning. "Did you strike your sister with a belt on the night in question?" she asked directly. "I administered appropriate discipline as my father instructed," Kevin replied, using the rehearsed language Frank's attorney had clearly provided. "How many times did you hit her with the belt?" Kevin hesitated. "I do not recall the exact number." "More than 5 times?" "Possibly." "More than 10 times?" Another pause. "It was necessary to ensure she learned her lesson." "Did you stop when you saw she was bleeding?" Kevin's composure slipped further. "I did not notice any blood." "Did you stop when she lost consciousness?" His eyes darted to Frank, seeking guidance. She was being dramatic. I thought she was faking. The prosecutor produced the belt, sealed in an evidence bag. "Is this the belt you used?" Kevin nodded, then verbally confirmed when reminded his nod would not be recorded. "Your father gave you this belt for your birthday, correct?" "Yes." "And did he demonstrate how it should be used for discipline?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Kevin's eyes again sought his father's. Whatever he saw there must have confused him, because he hesitated, visibly uncertain. "Kevin," the prosecutor pressed, "has your father ever used this belt or another one to discipline you?" "Objection," Frank's attorney stood. "Relevance goes to pattern of behavior and household dynamics, Your Honor," the prosecutor countered. "Directly relevant to whether Frank Williams directed this abuse." "Overruled," the judge decided. "The witness will answer." Kevin seemed to deflate slightly, his rehearsed responses no longer sufficient. "Yes," he finally admitted. "My father believed in strict discipline." "Did he ever hit you hard enough to draw blood?" Another long pause. "Sometimes accidents happen during discipline." "Did your father instruct you to discipline Lillian the same way he disciplined you?" "He said I should make sure she learned respect." Kevin answered, his voice barely audible. He said, "Sometimes pain is the only teacher that works." A ripple went through the courtroom. Frank's jaw tightened visibly. My mother covered her face with her hands. The most surprising testimony came from my mother. Called by the prosecution, she walked to the stand with small, uncertain steps, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When sworn in, her voice was so faint, the clerk had to ask her to repeat her oath. Initially, she stuck to the family narrative, claiming she had no knowledge of the severity of what had happened until she found me in the basement. "And what did you do when you found your daughter unconscious and bleeding?" the prosecutor asked. "I helped her upstairs," my mother answered. "Did you seek medical attention for her?" Number. "Why not?" My mother glanced at Frank, then down at her hands twisting in her lap. Frank said it was not necessary. Mrs. Williams, the prosecutor, continued gently. "Has Frank ever used physical discipline on you?" Frank's attorney objected immediately, but again was overruled. My mother sat in silence for so long I thought she might refuse to answer. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "For the record, Mrs. Williams, has your husband physically abused you?" "Yes." The word seemed to cost her everything. "For how long?" "Since the first year of our marriage." Her voice grew slightly stronger. 8 years. "Were you afraid of what might happen if you sought help for Lillian after this incident?" "Yes." Tears slid down her cheeks now. "Frank said it would destroy our family, that Kevin would lose his college chances, that I would lose everything." "So you told your injured daughter to be grateful for being fed." My mother looked up, then meeting my eyes for the first time. "I was wrong," she said clearly. "I was terribly wrong, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." The judge called a brief recess after my mother's testimony. When court resumed, Frank took the stand, his demeanor still controlled, but with an edge of desperation now. He denied directing Kevin to beat me severely, claimed any injuries were unintentional, and attempted to paint himself as a strict but loving father. But the evidence had mounted too high, too undeniably. The medical records, the testimony from school officials, Kevin's admissions about Frank's discipline methods, and finally my mother's confirmation of abuse all built a case that his smooth denials could not dismantle. When the judge delivered her ruling, her voice was stern with barely contained anger. The evidence in this case reveals not just a single incident of excessive punishment, but a household where violence was used systematically to control and intimidate. She ordered Kevin to be placed in a juvenile detention facility with mandatory therapy, a remarkably serious consequence for a first-time offender with his academic record. Frank was charged with child endangerment and domestic violence, with criminal proceedings to follow in adult court. My mother was required to attend parenting classes and therapy with supervised visitation to be reassessed after 6 months. Most importantly for me, I would remain in foster care with a permanent placement to be arranged pending further evaluation. As the bailiff led Kevin away, he looked back at me once. In his eyes, I saw confusion and the first hints of something that might, with time and therapy, become remorse. Frank stared straight ahead, his perfect facade finally shattered. And my mother, after a whispered conversation with her newly appointed attorney, approached Sarah and asked if she might speak with me privately at some point. "That will be up to Lillian," Sarah replied, her hand protective on my shoulder. I did not answer then. I was too overwhelmed by what had just happened, by the public acknowledgement of what I had endured, by the validation that I had not been wrong or weak or deserving of abuse. Justice had finally spoken, and its voice was louder than my fear. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I moved from the Johnsons' emergency placement to a more permanent foster home. The Williams family, no relation to my former family, a coincidence that initially made me uncomfortable, had been fostering children for over 15 years. They lived in a modest 4-bedroom house about 30 minutes from my school, allowing me to continue attending without disruption. Carol and Robert Williams were in their 50s, with grown children of their own, and a seemingly inexhaustible reserve of patience. Their home operated on clear but gentle principles: respect for privacy, open communication, and natural consequences rather than punishment. The first time I accidentally broke a mug while doing dishes, I had a panic attack, certain that some form of retribution would follow, despite their assurances to the contrary. Lillian, Carol said, kneeling beside me as I frantically tried to gather the ceramic shards with shaking hands. "Accidents happen. They happen to everyone. No one gets hurt for accidents in this house." It took weeks before I truly believed her, before I stopped flinching at sudden movements or apologizing constantly for minor infractions of rules that existed only in my mind. My healing was not just physical but psychological. The welts and cuts on my back gradually faded to scars, pink lines that would eventually silver with time. The wounds to my sense of safety and trust took longer to address. Twice weekly, I attended therapy sessions with Dr. Rivera, a child psychologist specializing in trauma. At first, I sat silent during our appointments, unwilling to revisit the pain I had barely escaped. "We can just sit here, Dr. Rivera," offered during our third session after 30 minutes of my stubborn silence. "There is no rush. Healing happens on your timeline, not mine." Something about her lack of pressure cracked my resolve. "Do you know what it is like?" I finally asked, "to be afraid in your own home, to calculate every word, every movement, because the wrong one might trigger violence?" "I do not know personally," she answered honestly. "But I have worked with many young people who do. And I believe you." Those 3 words, "I believe you," became a lifeline. After years of having my reality denied or minimized, being believed was revolutionary. Gradually, I began to share more. The constant anxiety, the hypervigilance that had become second nature, the nightmares that still plagued me. Dr. Rivera taught me coping mechanisms for when panic threatened to overwhelm me, grounding techniques that brought me back to the present when memories pulled me into the past, breathing exercises that calmed my racing heart when triggers appeared unexpectedly. School became a sanctuary rather than just an escape. Without the constant stress of home life, I discovered I actually enjoyed learning. My grades improved from above average to exceptional. My English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, noticed my gift for writing and encouraged me to join the school literary magazine. "You have a powerful voice, Lillian," she told me, after reading a poem I had written about finding strength in broken places. "Your words could help others who feel voiceless." The Williams household expanded my understanding of what family could be. Dinner was not a tense performance of perfection, but a relaxed gathering where everyone talked about their day, including frustrations and failures along with successes. Disagreements happened, but they were resolved through conversation rather than intimidation. When Robert and Carol occasionally argued, they did so respectfully without name-calling or threats, and always reached resolution. "Healthy conflict is normal," Carol explained when she noticed my anxiety during one such discussion. "It is how we handle it that matters." 6 months into my placement with the Williams family, my social worker brought news about Kevin. He had been participating in an intensive therapy program at the juvenile facility, addressing not just his behavior toward me, but the abuse he had suffered himself. "He has asked if you would consider receiving a letter from him," the social worker explained. "You are under no obligation to agree." I considered the request, carefully discussing it with both Dr. Rivera and the Williams. "What do you think I should do?" I asked Carol one evening. "I cannot tell you what to do," she replied. "But I can tell you that whatever you decide, we will support you. Your healing comes first." After 2 weeks of consideration, I agreed to receive Kevin's letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, 3 pages of careful handwriting. He did not make excuses for what he had done, though. He explained the cycle of violence that had shaped him. Frank had begun disciplining him when he was 8, using increasingly severe methods as Kevin grew older. By the time I entered the picture, Kevin had been conditioned to believe that violence was normal, even necessary for proper development. "I am not writing this to justify what I did," his letter concluded. "Nothing could justify hurting you that way. I am writing because I want you to know I am working to break this cycle. I will never hurt anyone like that again. I do not expect your forgiveness, but I hope someday you might find peace." I did not respond immediately. The letter stirred complicated emotions, anger still, but also a new understanding of how Kevin had been shaped by the same toxic environment that had nearly destroyed me. News about my mother came through more official channels. She had filed for divorce from Frank, moved into a small apartment, and was faithfully attending both individual therapy and parenting classes. Her supervised visits with me began awkwardly, both of us uncertain how to interact, without the oppressive presence of Frank dictating our roles. "I failed you," she said during our third visit, finally addressing the elephant in the room. "I was supposed to protect you, and instead I became part of what hurt you." "Why did you stay?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. Why did you let it happen to us? She had no simple answer, just the complicated reality of fear, financial dependence, eroded self-worth, and the insidious way abuse escalates so gradually that each new level becomes normalized. I thought I was keeping things from getting worse, she explained. I believed if I could just be perfect enough, do everything right, he would not get angry. When that failed, I thought if I could at least direct his anger toward me instead of you kids, I was doing my job as a mother. She wiped away tears. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. Forgiveness did not come quickly or easily. It emerged in small moments over months of visits as I watched my mother reclaim her identity and acknowledge her failures without excuses. She did not demand forgiveness or rush my healing to alleviate her guilt. She simply showed up, consistently proving through actions, rather than words, that she was committed to change. At the end of 8th grade, I received an academic achievement award. When I looked out from the stage after accepting it, I saw Carol and Robert Williams applauding enthusiastically from one section of the auditorium. And several rows back, sitting quietly but smiling with unmistakable pride, was my mother. That summer, just before starting high school, I made a decision that surprised even me. With Dr. Rivera's guidance and the full support of the Williams, I asked if I could visit Kevin at the juvenile facility. The meeting was arranged with counselors present in a neutral room with comfortable chairs and windows overlooking a small garden. Kevin had changed physically, his formerly athletic build leaner, his expression less arrogant. When I entered, he stood, but did not approach me, respecting the boundaries we had established beforehand. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. We talked for 45 minutes, not about the past primarily, but about the present. His therapy, my new home, the books we were reading, his plans to complete his GED. Near the end, he asked the question I could see had been weighing on him. "Do you think you will ever be able to forgive me?" I considered my answer carefully. "I am working on it," I told him honestly. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to hate takes too much energy that I need for healing." He nodded, accepting this partial answer as more than he had any right to expect. As I prepared to leave, he said one more thing: "I am proud of you, Lillian, for being stronger than all of us." High school began with a fresh start. Few of my new classmates knew my history, and those who did respected my privacy. I joined the debate team, discovering I had a talent for articulating arguments clearly and persuasively. My English teacher encouraged me to consider a future in law or psychology fields where I could potentially help others who had experienced trauma similar to mine. The Williams formally invited me to remain with them until graduation, an offer I accepted with gratitude and relief. Though my mother continued to improve and our relationship slowly healed, we both recognized that the stability of my foster placement was valuable for my continued progress. On my 16th birthday, Carol and Robert gave me a journal bound in soft leather, nothing like the belt that had once been used to hurt me. Inside the cover, Carol had written, "Your story matters. All of it, the pain and the healing. One day, it might light the way for someone else lost in darkness." That night, I began writing my full story for the first time, not just the trauma, but the recovery, the rebuilding of a life I once thought permanently shattered. With each page, I reclaimed a piece of my narrative from those who had tried to silence me. 15 years have passed since the night my brother beat me with a belt until I collapsed. I am 28 now, with a master's degree in psychology and a career counseling survivors of family violence. The scars on my back have faded to thin silver lines visible only if you know to look for them. The emotional scars have softened too, though certain triggers can still occasionally transport me back to that basement. My office is deliberately designed to feel safe, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, no weight benches or equipment that could remind clients of places where they were hurt. On my desk sits a small sculpture of a phoenix rising from ashes, a gift from the Williams when I graduated college. "Where did you find the strength?" clients often ask me. "How did you move forward?" The answer is both simple and complex. I moved forward because staying still was not an option. I found strength because the alternative was surrender to a narrative written by those who had harmed me. But I did not do it alone. Every step of my journey has been supported by others who believed in my worth when I could not see it myself. Miss Thompson, the gym teacher who noticed what others missed and took action rather than looking away. The Johnsons, and then the Williams, who showed me what family should be. Dr. Rivera, who guided me through the labyrinth of trauma with unfailing patience. Sarah, the guardian ad litem who fought for my rights in court. These people formed a safety net that caught me when I fell, and a ladder that helped me climb toward healing. My mother and I have built a new relationship, one based on honesty rather than fear. She completed therapy, maintained her sobriety after turning to alcohol briefly during the divorce, and eventually became an advocate for domestic violence awareness, speaking to women's groups about recognizing the warning signs she had missed or ignored. "I cannot change what happened to you," she told me once, "but I can help make sure it does not happen to someone else's child." Frank served 4 years for child endangerment and domestic violence. Upon release, he moved to another state. We have had no contact, a boundary I established and have maintained. Some wounds are best healed by distance. Kevin's path has been more complicated. After 3 years in juvenile detention with intensive therapy, he earned his GED and eventually a degree in social work. Today, he works with at-risk youth, particularly boys showing early signs of violent behavior. We communicate occasionally through email and have met in person a handful of times. Our relationship will never be typical, but it has evolved into something neither of us could have imagined during those dark years in that house. "The belt left scars on both of us," he said during our last meeting. "Just different kinds." The most powerful lesson I have learned through all of this is that cycles can be broken. The violence that shaped my childhood did not have to define my future. I made a conscious choice to end the pattern, to build a life based on compassion rather than control, communication rather than fear. This does not mean forgetting what happened. Indeed, remembering is crucial. My experiences inform my work every day, allowing me to recognize pain in others that might otherwise remain hidden. But remembering without being consumed by the memory is a delicate balance, one I work at daily. I sometimes think about that moment in the courtroom when the evidence of my injuries was displayed. The silence that fell as people confronted the reality of what had been done to a child in the name of discipline. That silence represented a collective recognition this was wrong. Unequivocally, undeniably wrong. Justice did indeed hit harder than any belt could. Not through vengeance or retribution, but through truth, acknowledged harm, recognized, and healing made possible. The system that too often fails vulnerable children worked for me largely because adults like Miss Thompson and Sarah refused to look away or take the easier path. For those of you watching who might recognize your own story in mine, please know you are not alone. The cycle of abuse thrives in silence and isolation. Breaking that silence is terrifying but necessary. Reach out to a teacher, a counselor, a friend's parent, anyone who might help. You deserve safety. You deserve care. You deserve justice. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against family abuse? What would you do if you suspected a child was being harmed? Your comments could help create awareness that saves lives. Please like this video if it touched you, subscribe to support more stories of survival, and share it with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible. Remember, in the fight against family violence, your voice matters too. Thank you for bearing witness to my journey, and may it give you strength for your own.